Alright, good morning guys. Here we are back with Stargirl. We only have 5 more days of reading, so after this week we will be all done, which is pretty crazy. Make sure you are working on your summaries, or make sure you're checking teams. Not even and make sure you're checking teams. Teams is now where your assignments are for the rest of this book. So please make sure you're on there and checking, because grades count and you need to be keeping up. So please check teams to make sure you understand, or make sure you're keeping up with what assignments you have for the book. All right, here we go. Chapter 26, page 139. Usually I saw her in the courtyard before school, but that day I didn't. Usually I passed her between classes, at least once or twice before lunch. Not that day. In fact, when I looked over at her table at lunch, there was Dory Dilson as usual, but someone else was sitting with her. No Stargirl in sight. Coming out of the lunchroom, I heard laughter behind me, and then the voice, Stargirl's. What do I have to do to get someone's attention around here? I turned, but it wasn't her. The girl standing, grinning in front of me, wore jeans and sandals, had burnt red nails, and the lipstick, painted eyes, finger rings, toe rings, hoop earrings, and I could put my hand through. Hair, I gawked as students swarmed past. She made a clownish grin, and she was beginning to look vaguely familiar. Tentatively, I whispered, "Stargirl?" She batted her chocolate eyelashes. "Stargirl? What kind of a name is that? My name is Susan." And just like that, Stargirl was gone, replaced by Susan. Susan Julia Carraway, the girl she might have been all along. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She cradled her books in her arms, and the sunflower canvas bag was gone. The rat was gone. The ukulele was gone. She turned around slowly for my open mouth, dumbstruck inspection. Nothing goofy, nothing different I could see. She looked magnificently, wonderfully, gloriously ordinary. She looked just like 100 other girls at Micah High. Stargirl had vanished into a sea of them, and I was thrilled. She slid a stick of chewing gum into her mouth and chewed away noisily. She winked at me. She reached out and tweaked my cheek, the way my grandmother would say, "What up, cutie?" I grabbed her right there outside the lunchroom in the swarming mud. I didn't care if others were watching. In fact, I hoped they were. I grabbed her and squeezed her, and I had never been so happy or so proud in my life. We sailed through time. We held hands in the hallways, on the stairs, and in the courtyard. In the lunchroom, I grabbed her and pulled her over to our table. I looked to invite Dory Dilson too, but she was gone. I sat there grinning while Kevin and Susan gabbed and gossiped over the sandwiches. They joked about their disastrous appearance on Hot Seat, and Susan suggested that I go on Hot Seat one of these days. And Kevin said, "No, he's too shy." And I said, "Not anymore," and we all laughed. And it was true. I didn't walk, I strutted, meaning I walked confidently. I was Susan Carraway's boyfriend. Me, really? That Susan Carraway? The one with the tiny barrettes and toe rings? Yep, that's the one, my girlfriend. Call me Mr. Susan. I started saying we instead of I, as in we'll meet you there, or we like fajitas. Whenever I could, I said her name out loud, like blowing bubbles. And the rest of the time I said it to myself. Susan, Susan. We did our homework together, and we hung out with Kevin. Instead of following strangers around, we went to the movies and plunged our hands together into the $6 super tub of popcorn. Instead of shopping for African violets, we shopped for Cinnabons and licked icing from each other's fingers. We went to Pizza, and we walked past the bulletin board inside the door. We just shared a pizza, half pepperoni, half anchovies. Anchovies, ugh, I said. What's wrong with anchovies, she said. How can you eat them? Nobody eats anchovies. I was sort of kidding, but her face was serious. Nobody? Nobody I know. She picked the anchovies from her slices and dumped them into her water glass. I tried to stop her. Hey. She pushed my hand away, and she dropped the last anchovy into the glass. I don't want to be like nobody. On the way out, we ignored the bulletin board. She was mad for shopping. It was as if she had just discovered clothes. She bought shirts and pants and shorts and costume jewelry and makeup. I began to notice that the items of clothing had one thing in common. They all had the designer's name plastered prominently on them. She seemed to buy not for color or style, but for designer label size. She was constantly quizzing me about what the other kids would do, what they would buy, would say, would think. She invented a fictitious person whom she called Evelyn Everybody, meaning a fake person. What would Evelyn like? Would Evelyn like this? Would Evelyn do that? Sometimes she misfired as with laughing. For several days, she was on a laughing jag. She didn't just laugh, she boomed. Heads turned in the lunchroom, and I was trying to work up the nerve to say something when she looked at me. She looked at Kevin and me and said, "Would Evelyn laugh this much?" Kevin stared at his sandwich. I sheepishly shook my head. The laughing stopped, and from that moment on, she did a perfect imitation of a sullen, pout-lipped teenager. In every way, she seemed to be a typical, ordinary, everyday, run-of-the-mill teenager. And it wasn't working. At first, I neither noticed nor much cared that the shunning continued. I was too busy being happy that she was, as I saw it, now one of us. My only regret was that we could not play the basketball season all over again. In my mind's eye, I pictured her aiming her incredible zeal and energy exclusively at the electrons. We could have won games on her cheering alone. It was she who said it first. "They still don't like me." We were standing outside the TV studio after school. As usual, people were passing by as if we weren't there. Her lip quivered. What am I doing wrong? And tears made her eyes even larger. I squeezed her hand. I told her to give it some time. I pointed out that the state basketball finals would take place in Phoenix that Saturday, and that would end the season and clear the way for her cheerleading crimes to be forgotten. Her mascara was muddy, and I had seen her sad many times before, but always for someone else. This was different. This was for herself. And I was powerless to help. I could not find it in me to cheer up a cheerleader. That night we did homework together at her house. I ducked into her room to check out the happy wagon. There were only 2 stones in it. Right, this was the wagon that she had where if she was happy, she put more stones into it, and when she was sad, she took stones out of it. And when she was really happy, there were 18 stones in it. Now there's only 2 stones in it. So is she happy doing this? When I came to school the next day, there was something different about the buzz in the courtyard. The arriving students were milling about, some roaming at random and some in clusters. But as I approached, there seemed to be a distant clearing around the palmetto, which is a type of tree. I wandered in that direction, and through the crowd I could see that someone, Susan, was seated on a bench. She sat upright and smiled. She was holding a foot-long stick shaped like a claw on one end. Around her neck, dangling on a string, was a sign that read, "Talk to me, and I'll scratch your back." She was getting no takers. No one was within 20 feet of her. Quickly, I turned away. I walked back through the crowd, and I pretended I was looking for someone. I pretended I hadn't seen, and I prayed for the bell to ring. When I saw her later that morning, the sign was gone, and she said nothing about it, and neither did I. Page 144. The next morning, she came running at me in the courtyard. Her eyes were bright for the first time in days. She grabbed me with both hands and shook me. "It's going to be okay. It's going to end. I had a vision." She told me about it. She had gone to her enchanted place after dinner the day before, and that's where the vision had come to her. She had seen herself returning in triumph from the Arizona State Oratorical Contest, right, the speech contest. She had won first prize, best in the state. When she returned, she got a hero's welcome. The whole school greeted her in the parking lot, just like in the assembly film. There were streamers and confetti and tooting kazoos and horns blaring, and the mayor and the city council were on hand, and they had a parade right then and there. and she rode high on the back seat of a convertible and held her winner's silver plate up for all to see, and the happy faces of her classmates flashed in the sparkling trophy. She told me this, and she threw up her arms and shouted, "I'm going to be popular!" The state contest was a week away. Every day she practiced her speech. One day she called over a little Peter Stinkowitz and his playmates and presented the speech to us from her front steps. We applauded and whistled, and she bowed grandly, and I, too, began to see her vision. I saw the streamers flying, and I heard the crowds cheering, and I believed. All right, so I want you to think a lot about that section. I want you to think about whether or not it was okay for her to change. Do you think it was a good idea? Do you think it worked? Do you think Leo's reaction was good? Do you think it was bad? How did that chapter make you feel? And maybe listen to it again and kind of pick up on all the little bits, okay? It's kind of a loaded chapter with a lot of stuff in it. So yeah, maybe give it another listen. And then go check Teams to answer your questions. All right, guys, bye.